The night Anelise came into the world, the cabin felt as if it was holding its breath. Heat pressed against the wood walls, thick with the smells of sweat, blood, and pine smoke. Outside, cicadas screeched their feverish music, and somewhere far beyond the trees, a dog howled. Low, long, and mournful, like it sensed something unnatural stirring in the darkness. Inside the small cabin, 3 women stood over a straw pallet where 16-year-old Sally fought for her life. She was barely more than a child herself, her hands calloused from cotton, her back bent from years of labor, her body trembling from the pain tearing through her. Esther wiped her forehead. Ruth whispered prayers, and Martha, the oldest midwife on the plantation, tried to keep her voice steady. Martha had seen every kind of birth: strong babies, weak ones, stillborns carried out before sunrise. But as she knelt over Sally, she felt a strange fear building in her chest, a feeling she had never known in her long life. "Push, girl," Martha said, her voice firm even as her heart raced. "This, the last one. Push." Sally cried out. A sound pulled from somewhere deep, somewhere older than language. Her body arched, and then finally, the baby slipped into Martha's hands. The cabin fell silent. The baby didn't cry. For a moment, Martha thought she wasn't breathing. She rubbed the tiny back, ready to force life into that little chest, when the child inhaled on her own. But she still didn't cry. She simply opened her eyes. Martha froze. They were blue. Not the soft gray blue some newborns had. Not the cloudy color that darkened over time. These eyes were clear, bright, sharp, the exact blue of the master's family portrait hanging in the big house. Esther gasped and stumbled backward. Ruth crossed herself 3 times, and Martha felt something cold slide through her bones. Those eyes did not belong in this cabin. Not on this child. Not on the daughter of a 16-year-old field girl. Everyone knew who had come to the quarters that spring. Everyone had seen the master's son slip between cabins at night. Everyone had looked away. Now, the proof stared up from Sally's arms with summer sky eyes. Sally cried silently as she held her newborn not from joy, but from the terrible understanding of what had been done to her and what this child meant. She whispered one soft name, Anelise. It was spoken only once. After that, nobody used it again. She became that girl, the child, or nothing at all. Within a week, Sally herself was gone, sold quietly to a trader heading north. No explanation. No goodbye. The baby was left behind in Martha's care, hidden away like a secret too dangerous to mention aloud. From the beginning, she was unlike any child Martha had ever seen. She didn't cry through the night. She didn't reach for toys. She didn't coo or babble. She simply watched. Calm, silent. Her blue eyes wide and alert, as if she understood everything happening around her. Animals sensed it first. Chickens scattered when she toddled near. Dogs whined and slunk away. Horses stamped and refused to be led past her. Even the crows fell silent whenever she passed beneath their branches. By 2 years old, the other children kept their distance, not out of cruelty, but instinct. Even the adults stepped aside when she walked past. Some touched iron. Some touched salt. All whispered quick, fearful prayers. Only Martha stayed close, though even she felt a chill sometimes when the child stared at her too long. Late one night, when moonlight filtered through the cracked window, Martha awoke to see Anelise standing barefoot at the glass, staring out into the trees. "What you looking at, child?" she asked. The girl didn't turn. Her lips moved soundlessly, as if speaking to someone only she could see. Martha watched, with fear, with awe, with a heavy knowing. This child had come into the world wrong. Uninvited. Unwanted. Born from silence and violence. And whatever she carried inside her was already changing the air around them. Already watching the world that feared her. Already growing. Already waiting. As Anelise grew, the quarters learned one truth quickly. She was not like other children. By the time she turned 3, she moved through the cabins like a quiet shadow. Light-footed. Calm. Always observing. She rarely cried. She rarely spoke. She simply watched. People, animals, the sky, the dirt. As if the world was a puzzle only she could solve. But it was the animals who reacted first. The plantation dogs, usually bold and eager for scraps, whimpered whenever she stepped outside. They hid behind barrels, their tails tucked tight, their eyes fixed on something behind her rather than at her. The horses snorted and jerked on their ropes whenever she passed the stable. They rolled their eyes white, hooves scraping the ground, desperate to pull away from her tiny form. Even the crows, creatures that feared nothing, fell silent when she walked beneath their branches. They stared down at her, wings pressed close, waiting, watching, uneasy. The other children felt it too. When Anelise toddled toward them, jump ropes stilled, games halted, and a wide circle opened around her. They didn't tease her. They didn't push her away. They simply drifted back instinctively, as if something deep inside told them, "Do not get too close." Anelise never cried about it, never chased them, never asked why. She only stood there, her blue eyes fixed on them, studying their faces as if trying to understand something no one else could see. The adults were no braver. They whispered prayers under their breath when she passed, touched salt hidden in their pockets, pressed fingers to iron nails in the cabin door frames. No one scolded her. No one raised a hand to her. Even the cruelest among them stepped aside, like she carried an invisible storm around her. Only Martha stayed near her, steady, though not without fear. Then, one afternoon, the overseer Thaddeus Crenshaw stormed into the quarters. His temper was fire, his voice a whip. Someone had broken a rule he made just that morning, and he came looking for a target. He grabbed Martha by the arm. She winced, but didn't speak. Before he could raise his hand, Anelise stepped forward. Small, barefoot, silent. She didn't yell. She didn't touch him. She simply looked up, her blue eyes fixed on his face. Crenshaw's arm froze midair. A tremor ran through him, starting in his hand, crawling up his arm, shaking his chest. His jaw clenched. Sweat slid down his temples. Something unseen pressed against him, heavy as guilt, cold as river water. And then his hand fell. Slowly. Limp. He stepped back, turned around, and walked away without a word. From that day on, Crenshaw avoided her shadow. A man who feared nothing now flinched at the sight of a child. But Anelise's strangeness didn't stop there. She began to speak at 4, but not like other children. Not in questions or baby talk. She spoke facts. "You'll lose your earring, Ruth. It's under the cabin steps. The rain is coming at sundown. Esther's boy will fall from the loft." And when she spoke, it happened. Every time. No one taught her to read, yet she traced letters in the dirt like she already knew them. She copied symbols from torn newspapers, from scraps of Bible pages, from anything she found. Her eyes moved fast across every mark, hungry, intent, as if words were food. Sometimes Martha woke at night to find her standing at the window, lips moving in silent conversation with the darkness. Sometimes she drew strange shapes in the dirt, patterns Martha didn't recognize, symbols that looked older than scripture, older than language itself. Sometimes she simply stared. At the river, at the sky, at people's faces. And in those moments, Martha felt certain. Something ancient was looking through the eyes of a little girl. The quarters whispered. The big house pretended not to see. But everyone knew. Anelise wasn't just different. She was becoming something they could not explain and could not control. By the time Anelise turned 6, her name had traveled far beyond the plantation. Stories whispered through the pine forests and along the dusty roads. Stories of a quiet child, a watching child, a child with blue eyes that were not supposed to exist. And stories like that always bring one kind of man, a preacher. He arrived one hot Sunday morning, a tall, thin Baptist with a booming voice and a belief that sin could be drowned out with enough prayer and force. His coat was black, his Bible heavier than common sense, and his confidence louder than the cicadas. He insisted the girl was touched by darkness. He insisted she needed cleansing. He insisted he alone could save her soul. Martha tried to refuse him, but the master allowed it. Anything to silence the rumors. So they walked to the creek. The sky was gray, swollen with the promise of rain. The slaves stood along the muddy bank in silence, their faces tense as the preacher waded into the water up to his waist. "Anelise," he called, "bring the child forward." She stepped into the creek without fear, barefoot, calm, the cold water rippling around her small legs. The preacher placed a heavy hand on her head. "In the name of the Father," he shouted, and he pushed her under. Martha's heart clenched. Esther gasped. Ruth whispered every prayer she knew. The preacher held her down longer than he should have, as if trying to force something out of her. Then he lifted her back up, water streaming down her face like glass. That was when everyone went still. The water around Anelise had changed. It wasn't muddy. It wasn't cloudy. It was black. Black like ink. Black like oil. Black like something alive. The preacher stumbled backward, eyes wide with terror. He stared at the dark water swirling around the child's legs, a darkness that should not have been there. Anelise opened her eyes slowly. Those impossible blue eyes fixed on him. And she spoke one calm sentence. "You cannot wash away what I am." The preacher froze. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then he grabbed his Bible, scrambled out of the creek, and ran past the cabins, past the fields, ran without looking back. He left before sunset. He never returned. And after that day, no one, not even the bravest, not even the cruelest, ever suggested fixing Anelise again. Because the creek had shown them all. Whatever lived inside that child was not something water could ever cleanse. After the preacher fled in terror, the story of Anelise spread even faster. People spoke of the baptism where the water turned black, of a silent child who looked through your soul, of blue eyes that did not belong on a slave girl. Soon the plantation saw visitors it had never seen before. Doctors, scientists, men who claimed to believe in reason, not superstition. But even they were not prepared for her. The first doctor arrived from Savannah, a polished man with spectacles and a notebook full of confidence. He examined Anelise for hours, testing her eyes, touching her pulse, asking her questions she should not have understood. And yet she answered each one with quiet precision. On his second night, the doctor paced the cabin, muttering theories, refusing to admit that something unnatural lived behind those eyes. But on the third morning, Martha found him outside, loading his carriage with shaking hands. She asked him what he had discovered, and he whispered, "She told me about my daughter, the one no one knows about, the one I lost 15 years ago." His voice cracked as he said, "She described the dress she died in." Then he climbed into his carriage and fled down the road without another word. A month later, another doctor came. Older, harder, a man who believed only in measurements and facts. He brought sealed envelopes, each holding a question about the future, and asked Anelise to answer without opening them. She ran her fingers over each envelope and calmly predicted everything inside. The barn fire that killed 3 horses, the letter that announced a death, the pocket watch the doctor would drop and crack on Monday morning. When every prediction came true exactly as she said, his confidence shattered. Martha later found his notes half burned in the fireplace. The last line, written in a trembling hand, read, "She knows what I have done. God help me. She knows." No more doctors came after that. The plantation grew quiet again, but not with peace, only with fear. The big house whispered about the child as if she were a storm they hoped would pass if they ignored it. But the quarters knew better. A child who could see the past, the future, and the secrets of grown men was not a storm. She was a warning, a presence, a truth that refused to be buried. And day by day, Anelise's silence grew heavier, sharper, as if she carried the weight of everything she saw, everything the rest of them tried to forget. After the doctors fled, the big house made a quiet rule. No one was to speak Anelise's name. She became that girl, the child, or nothing at all. But even without a name, the house could not pretend she didn't exist. Whenever Anelise stepped through a doorway, the air changed. Clocks that had ticked steadily for years stopped mid-second. Candles flickered and died, as if blown out by an invisible breath. Paintings cracked down the center, like something inside them was splitting open. Mirrors fogged over, not with steam, but with a strange cold haze that clung to the glass long after she walked away. Children in the big house began waking at night, screaming that a girl with blue eyes was calling them from the bottom of the well. Servants tried to hush the stories, but whispers spread faster than fire. Even the master's wife, frail, pale, always drifting between laudanum dreams, claimed she saw a child watching her from the corner of her bedroom. But the master, Garrett Ashford, pretended none of it existed. He walked past Anelise without a glance, without the slightest flicker of recognition, as if ignoring her made her less real. In the quarters, things were different. The slaves feared her, yes, but they also protected her. Anelise warned Ruth where her missing earring was hidden. She told Esther which herbs would ease her pain. She whispered to Martha when Crenshaw was coming, so the women could hide what needed hiding. She never asked for anything in return. She simply moved through the world like she was meant to keep watch over it. Yet as she grew older, something in the air around her thickened. When she was angry, Small objects slid across tables. A door would close by itself. A cup would jump as if struck by an unseen hand. Then the things got bigger. A chair tipping over without anyone near it. A window cracking outward as though pushed from inside. The others pretended not to see it, but everyone felt it. Fear and awe mixed together in their throats. One night, when moonlight silvered the floorboards of Martha's cabin, the old woman finally asked, "Child, what are you?" Anelise did not turn from the window. She did not blink. She only spoke softly, as if reciting something she had always known. "I am what happens when something wrong tries to become something right." Martha's breath caught. "And what does that mean?" she whispered. Anelise finally looked at her. Her eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. Blue, bright, and far too aware. "It means," she said, "that I am inevitable." Not long after Anelise declared herself inevitable, a new threat arrived at the plantation. A traveling preacher named Josiah Crane. Thin, severe, and trembling with holy fire, he had heard the stories whispered across Georgia. A cursed child, a girl with unnatural eyes, a haunting that would not rest. He claimed he came to cleanse the land, but everyone could see the hunger in him, the hunger of a man who wanted to conquer something he didn't understand. Crane held a sermon that Sunday under the shade of the big oak. He preached loud, calling Anelise a danger, a demon, a child born in sin. The slaves listened only because they were forced to, their faces blank, their bodies still. Martha stood at the back, arms crossed, unimpressed. She had seen too many men like him, full of scripture but empty of mercy. When the sermon ended, Crane confronted her directly. "I know what walks here," he hissed. "You protect a demon." Martha looked him in the eye and said, "I protect a child, something you men never did." That night, Crane insisted on cleansing the master's old study. He lit candles, smeared oil on the door frames, and read scripture with trembling hands. Richard Ashford let him work, if only to calm his nervous wife. But Martha sensed trouble. She felt a heaviness settle over the plantation as the sun went down. At midnight, every candle in the study went out at the same time. The room dropped into perfect darkness. Crane froze. His breath turned white in the air. Then softly, from somewhere in the shadows, came a small voice. "You do not belong here." Crane spun around wildly. "Show yourself." A pause. "Then you know who I am." He fumbled for a match, but his hands shook too hard to strike it. And then he saw them. Two glowing blue eyes floating in the dark, cold and steady, watching him without blinking. His voice cracked. Demon." Anelise stepped closer, her form barely visible, made of shadow and pale light. And then she spoke his sins. Every one. The children he had taken into his care, the ones he claimed to save but had secretly harmed. She named their towns, their ages, their last words. Crane fell to his knees, gagging on his own breath. "You hide behind scripture," she whispered. "But scripture does not hide you." Crane tried to pray, but no sound left his throat. The eyes moved closer. "You will never escape what you have done," she said. "Every sermon you preach will carry their faces. Every prayer you say will echo their voices." The candles reignited all at once, flooding the room with trembling light. Crane was alone. He ran into the night without packing his things, without saying goodbye. At dawn, they found him miles down the road, collapsed, babbling about judgment and blue eyes. he never recovered. He spent the rest of his life in the Milledgeville Asylum, rocking in a corner, whispering apologies to children only he could see. In the quarters, the story spread fast. Some slaves crossed themselves. Some smiled. Some whispered, "Justice." Martha simply looked toward the river and murmured, "Be careful, child. Rage can burn even the one who carries it." But there was no answer. Only wind, and the distant sound of humming. Soft, eerie, and unmistakably the voice of a little girl with blue eyes that saw everything. After the preacher's collapse, the plantation felt different. Heavier, darker, as if the land itself had begun to breathe slower. Strange things started happening almost immediately. Crops that once grew strong began to fail. Corn wilted overnight. Cotton plants dried up before harvest. Animals fell sick without wounds or symptoms. Their bodies found lying still at dawn with no explanation, except a sense that something had simply taken their life away. Richard Ashford, now master of the plantation, grew desperate. He drove the workers harder, trying to force life from dead soil. But the more he pushed, the more the land resisted. His wife, Constance, saw it clearer than he did. She began having nightmares, visions of a girl standing at the foot of her bed, blue eyes glowing in the dark, whispering truths Constance had spent her life avoiding. She woke screaming more nights than not. The doctor said nervous exhaustion, but Constance knew better. She knew she was being judged. Then the disappearances began. A young man named Samuel vanished first. His bed empty, his things untouched. No signs of escape, no tracks, as if he had simply walked into thin air. Then Grace vanished. Then Isaiah. Every missing person had one thing in common. They were the ones who had suffered the most, the ones the overseers had broken, the ones the world had been cruelest to. Richard declared they were runaways and sent dogs into the forest. But the dogs refused to track. They whined, tucked their tails, and ran back whimpering. There was no scent to follow, no trail, no clue at all. The slaves didn't panic. Some even whispered prayers of thanks. Martha listened, silent and knowing. She understood. Anelise wasn't taking them. She was showing them a way out. Paths the world had never allowed them to see before. The girl who once brought fear was now guiding the broken toward freedom. Sir. Inside the house, terror deepened. Doors locked themselves. Rooms filled with a bitter cold that no fire could chase out. Servants reported hearing footsteps in empty halls, laughter from the walls, and the sound of water dripping where no water could reach. Constance could no longer sleep. She heard humming beneath the floorboards, like a child singing underwater. Richard, stubborn as always, denied it all. But he changed, too. His hair grayed. His hands trembled. He stopped eating. He woke each night gasping, claiming someone was standing over him. Each morning he looked thinner, as if something was draining him from the inside. One night, the land roared back. Richard stormed into the quarters, demanding answers about the missing slaves. He shouted, threatened, waving his cane like a weapon. The slaves stood silent, their faces expressionless. As he raged, the ground trembled beneath them, a low rumble that rose like thunder from the earth. Then it happened. Every lantern shattered at once, plunging the quarters into darkness. People screamed. Richard fell back, choking on fear. In that blackness, Anelise's voice floated through the air, soft but everywhere at once. This land remembers. Shapes formed in the shadows. Not solid bodies, just outlines. Flickers of people who had lived and died on that soil. The forgotten. the whipped, the buried. Hundreds of them, standing side by side, watching the man who claimed to own them. Richard stumbled backward, his body shaking. "You cannot run from the truth," Anelise said. "You cannot own what refuses to stay silent." The figures faded like mist. The lanterns flickered back to life. The slaves remained quiet. And Richard Ashford, who had once thought himself untouchable, now knew the truth. The plantation was dying. The land was rising. And the girl with blue eyes was not done. The weeks after the uprising of shadows broke Richard Ashford completely. His hair turned white. His steps grew unsteady. He wandered the house at night, whispering to things no one could see. The plantation, once proud, wealthy, cruel, was collapsing under its own sins. The fields were barren. The animals were dying. The walls of the big house were rotting from the inside, peeling like old skin. Constance, unable to endure the visions any longer, was sent away. She left silently, her eyes hollow, clutching a Bible she no longer trusted. Richard told everyone she would recover, but the truth was simple. The house had devoured her. Meanwhile, the slaves who vanished never returned. They left behind no tracks, no clues, no bodies, just empty beds and quiet goodbyes whispered into the night. Martha understood what the others only hoped. Anelise wasn't just judging anymore. She was guiding, opening a path north, leading the broken toward freedom in ways no man could follow. Then one morning, the servants discovered something strange. Every mirror, every polished plate, every reflective surface in the house showed the same image. Anelise as a little girl, standing by the river with her blue eyes shining. Around her image were names written in frost, thousands of names. The names of people who had lived and died enslaved on that land. Names no ledger had ever recorded. Names history had tried to erase. Richard smashed a mirror after mirror until his hands bled. But every surface, glass, water, metal, even his own eyes reflected those names back at him. That afternoon, Richard staggered onto the porch and ordered all the slaves, those who remained, to gather. He was shaking, pale, barely able to stand. "I want to speak to her," he said. To the girl. His voice cracked. "Anelise, I know you're listening." The wind went silent. Then came her voice, soft but everywhere. "You benefited from this. You perpetuated this. You enforced this. And you hid behind the law to excuse it." Richard fell to his knees. "Tell me what to do. Tell me how to make it right." "Free them," she said simply. He shook his head. The law is wrong," Anelise answered. "The law created me." Richard broke into sobs. The slaves watched silently, their expressions unreadable. For the first time in his life, he understood the truth. Power means nothing when the land rises against you. 3 weeks later, with trembling hands, Richard signed papers freeing every slave on the plantation. He gave them land. He gave them choices. He gave them whatever small piece of humanity he still had left to offer. And 6 weeks after that, he died quietly in his sleep. His face was peaceful. His eyes, once turned the same blue as Anelise's, had faded back to their natural color, as if she had released him. The plantation emptied. Nature reclaimed the fields. The big house rotted into the ground. Within a generation, all that remained were stone foundations swallowed by vines. But people who walked near the old land still whispered stories. a cold wind passing through the trees on hot days, a child's laughter drifting over the water, blue eyes watching gently from the shadows, and soft humming when the night grew very still. Martha lived long enough to see peace return to the land. When she died at 93, they buried her by the river, in the place where the glowing footprints had once ended. That night, people swore they saw two figures walking along the water, an old woman and a young girl, hand in hand, their shapes fading into the mist as a soft, wordless song drifted across the river. Not the song of vengeance, not the song of pain, but the song of remembering. Because the land had carried suffering for generations, and Anelise had finally made it speak. She became a guardian, a reminder, a warning carved into the soil. No wrong stays buried forever. No cruelty goes unanswered, and the forgotten will always rise. Some nights, when the moon is high and the river runs dark, you can still hear her humming. A small voice carrying the weight of thousands, asking a question the world must never ignore again.